There seems to be some discussion right now of the historic assessment around, historical figures, with the pulling down of the Edward Colston statue in Bristol. The Churchill statue was vandalised, with the tag that he was a racist. And some elements of Black Lives Matter are now talking about Lord Nelson. I'm not sure what Nelson's purported link with the slave trade was, but they now have him in their sights. Um, this is my position regarding historic figures. I don't believe anyone is above criticism. I don't believe any historic figure is above criticism. So, just briefly looking at Churchill, briefly because I want to talk about the main focus of my video. Yeah, Churchill had racist views. There's no question about it. Winston Churchill was a man of his generation. He may have been prime minister in the 1940s and 50s, but he was in many ways of a Victorian mindset. Although he was media savvy, although he led the country in the middle of the 20th century, he was a Victorian gentleman, and Edwardian, and I think he brought through some of the racial attitudes of his generation. Remember, he came of age in about the early 1910s. That was a time when there were widespread views that would be basically seen as white supremacists today. That was widespread, in polite society. Even those who would shun the mistreatment of black people, or for example, even abolitionists, had racialist attitudes that we would be shocked by today. Um, Abraham Lincoln supposedly told racist jokes in private parties. So I think the sort of racial attitudes of the 19th century were very removed from the sort of general attitudes that we have today. That needs to be understood. It's not to condone it, but it needs to be understood. Churchill's India policies were certainly controversial. In private, he could be cantankerous. He had a bad temper. None of this changes the fact that his leadership saved not only this country, but Western Europe, arguably, during the Second World War. He was a remarkable man, and I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at his negative side. But if it's being done to totally reassess his legacy, that's a problem because it's overlooking the fact that had it not been for his leadership, um, we probably would have been occupied by the Third Reich. Whether it would have went on as long as today is debatable. Probably not. It probably would have been there would have been some peace settlement or something eventually. But there's no question about it. His leadership saved this country. That brings me to Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali, like Winston Churchill, is another revered historic figure. Now, very different people. Winston Churchill was British Prime Minister during World War II. Muhammad Ali was an American heavyweight boxer who is seen as a larger than life figure and a cultural icon. So different personas entirely, but both pretty famous. When Muhammad Ali died 4 years ago, the eulogies were predictable and they really were pretty extensive. There's very few other sportsmen get former presidents speaking at the funeral. There's no question about it. Muhammad Ali is a very widely respected figure. No question about it. So let me just get this out of the way. I absolutely agree and acknowledge Muhammad Ali was one of the best boxers of all time. Maybe not pound for pound greatest, but he probably was the greatest heavyweight. The only person that comes perhaps close to that is Joe Lewis. Um, I put figures like Klitschko and Holyfield and Lennox Lewis in the top 10. But yeah, probably the greatest heavyweight of all time. I'm talking purely in boxing terms here. The sort of athletic skill he showed, his ring intelligence, his courage, the fact that he took on everyone. There is a lot of really strong points that do point to Ali being the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. And given the heavyweight division is, the heavyweight division, there is a particular aura about that, without question. Rocky Marciano fans may disagree, but I do think Ali definitely is in the running, to be the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. Boxing historians generally wouldn't rank him as the greatest boxer of all time. That would usually go to one of the guys in the lighter weight divisions, someone like, I mean, it's a matter of debate. Willie Pep is sometimes mentioned. Of course, Sugar Ray Robinson. Ali actually himself called Sugar Ray Robinson the greatest pound for pound fighter. Ali always said he was the greatest heavyweight. He was, of course, a great self publicist. So, anyway, whatever way you look at it, Muhammad Ali, great, great, great boxer, no question about it. Was he a charismatic figure? Absolutely. He was funny. He was larger than life. Um, he was unquestionably a charismatic figure. No one can deny that. Um, I'm fascinated by the man. I think it's, when you look at the Ali videos, when you look at his famous speeches, when you look at his rhyming, all that sort of stuff, it's hard not to find him compelling because he was. He was a charismatic figure, larger than life. He ensured by his self publicity that it would never be forgotten, and he never will. That's all true. Now I come to some inconvenient truths about Muhammad Ali. And if I was saying this in a boxing forum, I would be denounced as a charlatan. I would probably be asked about my ring experience because that seems to be the go-to if you criticize someone. And what have you done? It's like you can't make an honest assessment if you haven't done it yourself. I think that's a flawed argument. Um, if I was a boxer, if I was a prominent boxer, and we've already seen this, Floyd Mayweather got a lot of slack when he said he was greater than Muhammad Ali. But arguably, pound for pound, he arguably is. I mean, Mayweather's undefeated. Ali wasn't. But it's not just that. It's also that Ali took fights he really didn't need to take. Mayweather is one of the most intelligent ring tacticians of all time. I don't much care for his personality, but I don't think anyone can deny Mayweather's greatness. Um, anyway, and by the way, Mayweather may not quite be the bogeyman that he's sometimes made out to be. Apparently, he's given a lot of money to George Floyd family and has paid for the funerals of boxers. That was something I only found out recently. But anyway, um, and by the way, just sticking about boxing, I'll get back to Ali in a second, but I'll just say this briefly. Anthony Joshua made a speech at the Black Lives Matter rally in London. It's almost as compulsion for black athletes to do so. Deontay Wilder's also spoken out in the United States. Uh, Joshua got some slack for saying that we should, I believe his words were, we should not go to their businesses and just go to our own. So he's been accused of racism. It's a controversial statement. I'm not sure that's racist exactly. I think what he was saying was rather than trashing our businesses, let's patronize them. So I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt and think it was that. He did basically say, if you think I'm a racist, go and F yourself. But I think, for the heavyweight champion of the world, he couldn't realistically stay out of this. That's pretty obvious. But about Muhammad Ali, these are some basic facts about his biography that are all verifiable that people cannot deny. Muhammad Ali famously changed his name to Muhammad Ali from Cassius Clay. Now, his logic on this was Cassius Clay is my slave name. My slave name. That's a very important point because where did that name Cassius Clay come from? He was named by his black parents, by the way, after a 19th century Kentucky abolitionist, a man by the name of Cassius Marcellus Clay, who I believe was either a senator or a congressman, but he was a prominent 19th century abolitionist. So that's interesting. His parents named him after this respected Kentucky figure. Ali distorted that to be his slave name. Now, it's true that Cassius Marcellus Clay was born into a slave owning family, but he immediately released the slaves and he worked his whole life as an abolitionist. Not only did Ali distort that reality, but he was actually smearing a historic figure by suggesting that the historic Cassius Marcellus Clay was a racist when he was the exact opposite. Ali came from quite a comfortable middle class background. It was uncharacteristic for a lot of young black men of the time who came from basically tough inner city ghettos. Ali came from a relatively comfortable background, not luxurious, but relatively middle class, comfortable. Um, and his parents certainly never endorsed his later activity with the Nation of Islam. Now, one thing that's often said about his associations with the Nation of Islam is he was just young and naive and idealistic. Well, I used to think that, but having done some research, Ali actually stayed associated with the Nation of Islam well into his 30s, well into his career. And he actually associated with them relatively early in his career, not later on, relatively early. And he associated with them for a long time. Somewhat distanced himself after the assassination of Malcolm X. Ali was close friends with Malcolm X, and he was disgusted, of course, by that. So he distanced himself after that, but not before he actually um, was quite cold with Malcolm X, because Ali, like all the other Nation of Islam followers, was brainwashed by Elijah Muhammad, and that sort of cult mentality basically was a cult. The thing about the Nation of Islam wasn't a mainstream black organization. The majority of African Americans wanted nothing to do with it. They saw it as a rather nutty fringe organization, a bit like Hizb ut-Tahrir would be seen in the British Muslim community today. Um, so that's a very important point, because this was a big part of Ali's activism, his association with the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was not a mainstream organization. They were a very controversial organization, and with good reason. They had black supremacist views. They were not that different from the black Israelites today. Like I say, he eventually somewhat distanced himself from them. One thing more positive to say about Ali is his particular form of Islam, or school of thought within Islam, is, unless I'm mistaken, Sufi Islam, which is more about the mystical side. It tends to be less fundamentalist. Um, I don't think Ali ever became a hardcore Islamist, for example, although certainly his time with the Nation of Islam uh, can't be ignored. Now, Ali's racial views are absolutely undeniable. And what really bugs me is his apologists say, oh, well, it was the time that he was living in. There was rampant racism, there was rampant discrimination against the black man, and so on. Yes, there was. But the fact of the matter is, the African American community at that time, they basically had two paths. There was Martin Luther King's path, there was the Nation of Islam's path. Now, one could argue King's path didn't work because he was assassinated. That's what pacifism led to. So keen critics would say it didn't work. I think that's debatable. Um, but if you look at Ali's views, they're unquestionably racist. He supported segregation. He even purportedly visited a Ku Klux Klan meeting. Now, I have to say the details on that are somewhat scarce, but it wouldn't surprise me, because Ali was absolutely pro segregation. He very much believed in this mentality of your people and our people. So, at a time when mixed race couples actively face discrimination, there's the famous case of the Lovings. Ali openly said that black women shouldn't be with white men and vice versa. Um, that was pretty shameless in my view. Even if it was a sincere opinion, what right did Muhammad Ali have to tell anyone else who they should and shouldn't be with? This is an aspect of his biography that people seem to just excuse or overlook. Ali famously appeared on talk shows, and he would always talk in terms of you people. He had a very tribal mindset, insofar as Ali considered all white people one and the same. If you look at it, the way he conducted himself in talk shows, he always spoke about white people as you people. Okay, not I disagree with you as an individual, but you white people. I have a big problem with that. Look at the way he treated Joe Frazier, disgraceful. He openly called Joe Frazier, and this is verbatim, not my words, an Uncle Tom. An Uncle Tom. After Frazier had actually tried to help Ali, tried to rehabilitate him into the boxing world after he was you know, had that hiatus period when he refused to draft to Vietnam. Frazier actually stuck his neck out to try and get Ali back into the boxing world, of course, for their fight. But, how did Ali repay him? By calling him an Uncle Tom. a stooge of the white establishment. Not only is that a very inflammatory thing for a black man to say to another black man, but it was actually not true. Joe Frazier was very far from a white stooge. He came from a very hard scrabble Philadelphia background. And with the greatest respect to George Foreman, who's tried to downplay this, I think it did cause serious hurt to Joe Frazier, his reputation within the black community, and personally, it caused his. I mean, actually, the line in Rocky when Apollo Creed's children are being bullied at school, you don't see it, but it's referenced because of the fact that Rocky beat him. I think that might be a sort of reference to the fact that Joe Frazier's children got bullied because of the way Ali treated him. Now, you could say it was just hyping up their fights. I think it went beyond that, and I think there's no excuse for the way Ali treated Frazier. And I understand years later he made a kind of half-hearted apology, but really, that was well beyond hyping up fights. Now, later in life, Ali was unquestionably a humanitarian. He'd done a lot of good things. He'd done a lot of good work with charity. He acted as a sort of diplomatic envoy in a sense. I understand, for example, he helped free hostages from Iraq. He deserves credit for all of that. Unquestionably, he's inspired a lot of people, so I'm not denying that. But what am I driving at with all of this? Am I saying that, oh, well, let's just, totally reassess Ali's record? No, he was a great fighter. He was a charismatic figure. But unquestionably, when he passed away, there was a kind of cult of personality almost put around him. He's almost like, they almost turned him into a living deity. Muhammad Ali was far from perfect. And it's about time that people start to have an honest assessment of his life and legacy within boxing circles and beyond. So, if a boxer, for example, says, "Well, actually, I didn't entirely like Ali as a person," that shouldn't mean they're immediately denounced from the boxing world. Are they not entitled to an opinion? Is there not freedom of speech? Everything I've said in this video about Muhammad Ali is verifiable. It's factually accurate. One more thing, by the way, he wasn't above embellishing stories. For example, he claimed that he threw away his Olympic gold medal that he got in the 1960 Rome Olympics into the Mississippi in frustration at racism going on in that he'd been refused service as a black man in a restaurant. Now, whilst that's very plausible because there was, of course, discrimination against black men at the time, what actually happened was this interesting. He simply lost it. He claimed that he threw it away in frustration at what happened. That was typical Ali. The man was a great storyteller. He was a great embellisher, frankly. And I just think that there needs to be a more honest assessment in boxing circles. I'm not saying that he can't be admired. I think as a fighter, he should be admired. Um, I also think, whatever people's thoughts on his stance on the Vietnam War, I do respect him for standing up for his conviction. I don't. I'm not saying whether his stance was right or wrong, um, but he stood up for his conviction, and I think he deserves credit for that. So I give Ali credit as a fighter, as a charismatic figure, and for standing up for his conviction. Where I do not have much respect is the way he shamelessly race baited for years. And this was serious. This wasn't, the sort of clown Ali. These were serious sentiments. Ali was a racist. There's no question about it. He held racist views. So it seems to me if we're going to reassess historic figures, why not Muhammad Ali as well? And I do hope in future years there will be a more honest assessment of him within boxing circles, with one or two exceptions, is overwhelmingly being marbleized. It's been lionized. His legacy, I mean. Um, so when he passed away 4 years ago, it was absolutely predictable that the praise would just be unlimited. It would just be an avalanche. I can't think of any. I'm trying to think of other public deaths that had such a sort of such a veneration. Princess Diana would be one. Michael Jackson another. Um, Possibly Fidel Castro within Cuba. Nelson Mandela. I'm trying to think of people within my lifetime. There's not very many. but certainly Muhammad Ali is one of them. And is that is that entirely deserved? I just think there needs to be a more honest assessment of his legacy. The fact of the matter is, no matter what good he done later in life, for many years, Muhammad Ali was a very divisive figure. It's just a fact. He was rehabilitated later on when he famously brought the torch to the Atlanta Olympics, and there was genuine public sympathy for his ailment. Um, but other boxers had similar problems. And it was a genuinely sad thing seeing, such a athletic, dynamic fighter suffering the problems he did. Although Ali himself, to his credit, never wanted people to feel sorry for him. Um, one other point that has to be mentioned because it's here. He was a hypocrite. He was a religious hypocrite. I mentioned he was never a hardcore Islamist. I don't think he was exactly, but he could show hypocrisy. For example, he was a womanizer by his own admission. Yet he would shame his girlfriends if they showed a little flesh at his fights ringside. So he would try and coerce and tell them how they should dress or how they should behave, but it was fine for him to womanize. So the man had failings, and it's high time that people just recognize that, as everyone does. And I don't think it is being a hater for telling the truth about this. So, you just look at the attitude within boxing circles and with beyond. If someone like me who is honest about this and actually says, well, look, there was another side, I'd be immediately denounced. It's unfortunate because everything I've said here is verifiably the truth. Some people just have problems dealing with the truth. It doesn't fit the cozy little narrative. I believe historic figures need to be judged honestly. That means their whole biography.